Salutations Rangers, General Bradley 101, back at you again with some more lore. And today's video, boys and gals, we are taking a look at something very special and very, very destructive. We're going back to the world of Warhammer 40k, the Great Crusade, and the Horus Heresy. Because today, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about Space Marine Destroyer Squads, aka the War Crime Space Marine. No, quite literally. Their main purpose is genocide. Well, xenocide, which is like genocide, but for aliens. But they're not human, so does it really count? Hashtag humanity first, motherfuckers. But whether you love Xenos, or whether you hate them, or whether you just love to hate them, strap on in, grab yourself a snack, and let's get cracking on with today's video. The Space Marine Destroyer Squads, like everything in regards to the Space Marine Legions, have their origins way back when, during the Unification Wars of Terra. However, their origin does not lie with the Thunder Warriors, nor the Custodes, nor even the Emperor of Mankind, for it actually lies with the Techno-Barbarians of Old Night. You see, during the Battle for Terra, to say that the Techno-Barbarians were a bit excessive would be like saying that the sun is bright. These fellas were devoid of anything resembling any form of morals, and they were absolutely batshit crazy on every type of drug, alcohol, and warp dust you can imagine. Needless to say, they had no restraint. So, rather than being conquered by Big E and his giant raptor lightning bolts, they would then decide to unleash devastation, hell on earth, and this would take the form of various different entities. We have example of suicide squads, that being units that are quite literally armed with explosives as per traditional, except those explosives may be nuclear, or warp-based, or they may be psychers, unstable mutated beings, who are on the verge of psychotic destruction, and they are just sent into the foe, and then boom, warp rift, demons, etc. But a bit more traditional in the warfare department, we have weapons of mass destructions, WMDs, and these took the forms of various different flavors. The standard good old reliable tactical nuke, to the mass deployment of chemical agents, nerve gas, mustard gas, phosphex being a different type of hell altogether, but we'll talk more about that later. To say that the armies of Unity suffered greatly at these hands would be like saying that it's cold and bloody Alaska. These weapons were not only terribly deadly, they were often employed by people who really did not give the slightest bit of a damn. Not for their own sake, nor for the sake around them. Because what you need to understand about WMDs is that they don't just kill people, but they kill the very land that they're on. You may have a verdant paradise. Beautiful, awesome, amazing, just green, lush, a true Garden of Eden. If you drop a tactical nuke anywhere near there, bye-bye garden, hello fallout. But not even like a tactical nuke. Gas has an incredibly alchemical effect on any type of life, and if you use enough gas, enough chemical weapons in a saturation field that is dense enough, you will actually, actively, change the chemical composition of the very earth and of itself, completely ruining the ecosystem as well as any and all attempts to settle their period. Now, to be fair, Terra was indeed about 10,000 years worth of carbon emissions, so it didn't really give a fuck at that point. Shit was already fucked enough as is. But the fact that these people were fighting for their homes, so to speak, and they didn't really give a damn, it does show just how crazy Old Night was. Now, granted, to be fair, there were some factions in All Night who didn't really do that, but there were also some who did that pretty much every day. But eventually though, Big E would conquer Terra and he would start the solar reclamation, that being the conquering of all the planets in the Sol system, Luna, Mars, etc. And during that time, Big E would develop the Space Marine Legions as a whole. Now initially, the Space Marine Legions refused any form of destroyer squad, or to use any type of alchemical or any type of mass weapon of destruction. They saw it as dishonorable, they saw it as needless, they saw it as excessive, and they saw it as damning and a failure of humanity as a whole. But they were fighting to reconquer and reclaim these worlds. Why on earth would they subject them to destruction and devastation to render them inoperable? For had not the Men of Iron, centuries ago, destroyed humanity with these very same weapons? What was the point of using the same weapons that had killed humanity and placed us in this position just to do it all over again? And honestly, initially, that's quite noble. Now, whether you like Space Marines or not, you gotta admit, there's a big difference between killing someone with a big-ass gun and killing someone with a goddamn gas grenade. Massive difference. But that would all change. What had happened? Alien happened. You see, as the Space Marines began going through the Great Crusade, they encountered various different types of xenospecies. These xenospecies varied from mildly annoying to holy god on earth, what is that thing and why does it have so many tentacles? Thus, some of these species just hated humanity. Purely and outright, they had a vitriolic urge for our destruction. Now these are most likely layovers from Old Night and the various battles that the old interstellar human empire had with the various different xenospecies. So, they had a bone, they had a grudge, and they decided to take it out on us. When the Space Marines saw that, they knew that they needed to destroy them. Not beat them, not capture them, not kill them, destroy them. Render them wholly, completely, and utterly non-void. They needed to commit genocide, or xenocide. And a bolt gun cannot commit xenocide, but a tactical nuke, that can. So, Space Marine destroyers were implemented across pretty much every single Legion, and they were used to great effect. These were the Dark Sons of the Legion. These were the butchers, the destroyers, the monsters, the massacre makers. These were the Space Marines made manifest in the aspect of pure and utter annihilation. Side note though, whilst it is said that every single legion possessed a form of destroyers, it is also said that there are some legions who completely eschew their use outright. Now, we've never actually gotten any confirmed answers as to who and which legion did not use them. We have confirmed knowledges of legions who did possess them, but really did not like using them, a la the Ultramarines, Salamanders, Blood Angels, but we've never actually gotten any confirmed aspect of any legion which did not use them. But if I was to hazard a guess, I would say we have at least two, that would being the Emperor's Children and Thousand Sons. In the case of the Emperor's Children, they are all about perfection, about doing something correctly, with dignity, with honor, grace, purpose. To completely saturate a trench or a world or a planet with all types of alchemical weapons is an admittance of defeat. You cannot best the foe through skill of arms, so you just completely shower him in types of material that will kill him slowly. It is dishonorable, it is evil, and there is no perfection in it. In fact, it is the opposite of perfection. It is messy, it is terrible, and once again, it is completely dishonorable. Thus, I imagine it would be rather abhorrent to the Emperor's Children to use such weapons, at least early in the Great Crusade. Post-Sistavan, anything goes. And as for the Thousand Sons, well, they're scholars. They are first and foremost people who desire knowledge. They want to know, learn, keep, told, inscribe, learn, write, etc. To any man of knowledge, destruction is the antithesis, the complete opposite of knowledge. For when destruction reigns, knowledge is the first victim. Understanding, learning, all of those things are thrown to the wayside. For the tools of the alchemical, of the nuclear, of the phosphex, those are weapons of total and utter indiscrimination and mass annihilation. And in such a world, knowledge and understanding cannot thrive. They can only die. Hence, I can imagine those two legions absolutely detesting any and all forms of destroyer formations. And in the K-Sun's case, well, they have their psychic powers. So, I guess a nuke would be good against that alien, but I think magic lightning bolts also work as well. But then again, that's just purely speculation, not actually confirmed. But again, it could be a case of GW trying to keep the lore there, but also they don't want to strangle the tabletop. But hey, who knows? But as I said before, most legions considered Space Marine destroyers as a necessary evil, and some of them shunned them outright. But there were one or two who quite really liked them. The World Eaters and the Night Lords were quite big fans of them because murder motherfucker, but the greatest users, the most notorious users, and the king of destroyer squads goes to the 14th Legion, the Death Guard. The Death Guard, even before they became grandsons of Papa Nurgle, knew, loved, and embraced that good old mustard gas. Now this was twofold. One, the nature of Barbarous in of itself was a type of pseudo-death world. It had a very, very, very high toxicity level in its atmosphere, even to a point that towards the higher peaks of the planet, not even a Primarch's biology could survive the noxious fumes, meaning that the people who live on there grew a very much improved defense against this. They were resistant, they were far more understandable, they were able to recover more fast specifically, i.e. if they were able to sustain any type of deformation, degradation, or damage from the use of these weapons, their skin and their biology was already used to recovering, meaning that it was far less of a shock than compared to ordinary human beings. Even more so than that, Morty enough himself quite enjoyed the use of the weapons. He was known as the Death Lord for a reason. The Death Guard's tactics consisted of saturating an area with alchemical weapons and sending in hordes of armored infantry to mop everything up afterwards. This meant that they were incredibly effective against any and all type of fortified or dug-in enemy. And indeed, the Death Guard were known for their attritional-based warfare and hitting up the hard targets. But the downside being that you could never send them on anything other than destruction missions, because whatever they would touch would become saturated in alchemical fire. Meaning that if you want any type of resource from a planet, or any type of people from a planet, God forbid, if you send the Death Guard, the only thing you're going to get are corpses and rotten earth. Again, you only use them for destruction. That's partly why the Death Guard and the Salamanders grew so apart. Aside from one completely caring about civilians and the other completely not caring, both of them had similar roles. They were incredibly effective against entrenched, heavy enemy forces. They were also very heavy infantry based. The difference being is that when the Salamanders conquered a world, yeah, it was a little crispy, but eventually a forest will grow back. When the Death Guard conquered a world, they poisoned the very earth. since they both did the same thing, and since they were both diametrically opposed to one another, they were really deployed to the same places. And when they were deployed, there was often conflict in regards to that very involvement. This would only further the rift and divide between the two, and some argue that it did play a great part in the eventual betrayal. Not as much as Morty having a giant stick up his ass in regards to the Emperor for stealing his kill, mind you, but it's one of those little things that when you look at during the heresy, you'd brush it off and you ignore it. But you take a look at everything that happened after, and you're like, yeah, I can see the cracks beginning to form here. But while the Death Guard were the chief users of any and all type of destroyers, they were not the only users of destroyers. But before we get into that, let's talk about the actual destroyers and of themselves. Your standard destroyer unit was armed with a variety of mass destructive weapons. But there were three main types. There were radiation-based weapons, there were alchemical-based weapons, and then there were phosphex-based weapons. Radiation weapons, quite simple. Nuke gun, nuke bullets, radium, all that good stuff. Imagine Fallout, but somehow even worse. Alchemical is when we break out the freaky deaky science project. You see, in Warhammer 40k, there are significantly more chemicals than we know about today. Humanity had about 40,000 years to develop all types of bad bullshit, and there are various different types of acid chemical agents, gases, and some of their properties are a little bit wonky. We get some cases of liquids acting like gases acting like liquids, and then solids doing both. All in all, alchemical stuff is pretty nasty. But while the initial damage is terrible, with alchemical specifically, what you really need to watch out for is the lingering after effect. If you deploy, let's say, napalm to a valley, it will burn, and it will burn for a while, but eventually it will stop burning and you can travel through it again. If you deploy a type of chemical agent to a valley, that chemical agent could linger there for weeks if not months at a time, and in 40k, it can in some cases actively change the landscape completely. We have many cases of plants being absolutely ruined by the use of alchemical warfare, going from lush green paradises turned into malignant swamps of toxic mires. Think of it like this. If you want to kill people, use bolters. You want to kill the ground they walk on, use alchemical stuff. And then finally, we have my favorite, and arguably the worst, phosphex. Phosphex is a unique type of Warhammer 40k material. Now, judging by the name alone, you may think, oh, phosphorus. But yes, it is indeed somewhat like phosphorus, but it's even worse. Remember how I said that, the alchemical stuff gets a little wonky? Phosphex is type of that. Phosphex is a corrosive, yet also flammable material. So not only does it corrode armor, it also lights you on fire. It is also a type of gaseous entity, but it's so thick and heavy that it's almost some type of semi-liquidous gas. I think it's much more apt to describe it as a type of thick fog, but like a thick, wet fog. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced that, I haven't personally, but like this super thick, wet fog that when you pass through it, you feel moist, you feel damp. That's kind of what phosphex is, except this particular fog sets you on fire and corrodes your armor. It is arguably, aside from like a virus bomb, the most destructive, dangerous, and feared weapon in the arsenal of Warhammer 40k. Because I don't know about you, having a fiery, corrosive, acid, flaming napalm fog and having to walk through that son of a bitch. To me, I'm going home after that point. Alright, Commissar and the Bolthead, good, grand, all that. I don't give a damn, I'm not walking through that. But while those are the three main weapons, they are not exclusive. As I said, each legion has its own specializations, and they had their own unique different bits. But all of them had access to those three main categories. But speaking of the legions and the unique stuff, let's now take a look at the unique destroyer formations of each legion. So, we have the first one, that being the Dreadwing Intremptors of the Dreadwing, and the Dark Angels. So for those of you who don't know, the Dark Angels were composed into something known as the Hexagrammaton, or the 6 wings. There were various different types of wings. Of course, the two that you'll know are the Deathwing as well as the Ravenwing, but there were various different others. One of those was the Dreadwing. The Dreadwing was the destroyer formation essentially. The Dark Angels are unique amongst Space Marines in that they are indeed the basis of all Space Marine legions, so they did include destroyers, but they had a special type of destroyers. Those were known as the Intremptors. You see, the Intremptors were a very unique type of formation. They were very dour, but it was not a sense of dourness, of sadness, it was more of a understanding of duty. You see, the Dark Angels were the legion that had the most xenocides throughout the entirety of the Heresy and the Great Crusade, the most notable being the 3 Rangdang xenocides, which were terribly dreadful, and the Intremptors were at the main forefront of that. These boys would burst out of Land Raiders, Spartans, and they would be supported by Felglaves and Mastodons, and they would get right up and close and personal to the enemy, because they had a special type of weapon, that being the Plasma Burner. The Plasma Burner Afterburner is a plasma gun that is powered by a nuclear cell that emits a burst of irradiated plasma fire. TLDR, nuclear-powered plasma flamethrowers. That is as cool as it is fucking god-awful dangerous. To say that these were effective would be a terrible understatement. They were incredibly effective against armor for the fact that they were indeed plasma-based. Against any type of organic, the radiation would get them, and if they faced any type of horde or any type of other entity, flamers. All in all, these are much like the First Legion of themselves. Powerful, deadly, and terribly ancient. And these Brothers of the Dread were led by a lieutenant, known simply as a Dreadbringer. And wherever the Dark Angels tread, wherever a foe would need to be destroyed, it would be the Dreadbringers of the Dreadwing who would bring forth their Intremptor brothers and spew forth radiated plasma fire upon the foes of humanity. Pretty badass, pretty cool. Next up we move to the White Scars and the Karagolach Lanlar. The Karagolach Lanlar were a unique type of formation specific to the White Scars. Destroyer cadres did indeed exist, but they were not in any form of company or chapter command. Rather, these Dark Sons of Death, as they were known to be placed directly under the supervision of the Stormseer Council. The Stormseer Council was essentially a body above all official organization of the Legion, and essentially answered to the Khan Orvanov himself. Stormseers being their version of librarians, mind you. But moreover, these were Dower brothers. Their armor was painted a dull black, but moreover than that, they were also festooned and garnered with a hilarious amount of weird type of shamanistic charms. These charms were said to warn off the evil spirits that followed these Dark Sons. In fact, it was considered very grim by any Brothers of the White Scars if these guys showed up. They were often seen as heralds of death, but moreover, they were seen as the lingerers of death. It is believed that the spirits of the damned whom they had killed continued to haunt them and follow them throughout the entirety of their lives. Hence why they had the various different wards and sigils to protect them and ward them against such things. Now, whilst initially this may seem a little sus to you considering the Emperor's whole ban on religion and whatnot, this was actually purposely done by the Khan of himself. He did this as a visual reminder that destroyer cadres in of themselves were bad and evil. They were a necessary evil, and they were to remind his sons that while these brothers did what they were supposed to do, it wasn't exactly good. The Khan wasn't a big fan of destroyers, and whilst he understood that he didn't need to use them, he wanted it very clear to his boys that these aren't exactly something that you want to be with, or be around with for that matter. But from one legion who really didn't like them to a legion who absolutely loved them, we then come to the World Eaters and the Red Hand Destroyers. These were World Eaters who were destroyers, but more specifically they bore the mark of the Blood Hand, or the Butcher's Mark as it was known. And these destroyers are rather unique in that they don't really necessarily use alchemical or rad-based weapons, nor do they operate as standard destroyers. Whilst they do have access to these weapons, moreover specifically, they are just very good at killing. You see, the Red Hand Butcher Squads are chosen not because they show a prowess with a particular weapons, but moreover, they have proven that they are able to kill well for the Legion. And I mean that in all seriousness. They are the most brutal, the most vicious, the most terrible, the most destructive in combat. But they are not exactly the blood-burdened berserkers and butchers that will come to describe the Legion later, but some may argue that they were the first semblance of that. But these boys would be thrown together in Red Hand squads, and whenever Angron would deem an enemy need destroyed, these boys would be sent out with jump packs, power axes, and bolt pistols, and they would quite literally destroy everyone and everything in every area. It's quite ironic, but quite apt for the World Eaters. These were not destroyers because they used alchemical or weapons of mass destruction. These were destroyers because they just fucking killed motherfuckers real damn quick, real damn dead, real damn easy. There is a simplicity to the World Eaters that is quite alluring, if not at all founded in any form of reason or logic. We then move on to the Ultramarines. The Ultramarines were known for having at least one destroyer cadre, that being an entire chapter, 10,000 Marines, in their legion. That was known as the Nemesis Legion, the 22nd chapter to be specific. The Nemesis chapter, as they are called, were the grim destroyers of the Ultramarines. They were the dour sons who did what needed to be done. And whilst before the heresy, they were often seen as grim sons, they were dour, and they were a little shunned here and there, not too much per se, but you didn't exactly want them in pictures. But the brothers still understood that they had a job to do. And the warriors of the Nemesis, while a little dour, they understood that they still had some type of honor as Ultramarines. This would change, however, during the Battle of Kelth. During the Battle of Kelth, the Nemesis were one of the only formations that the Loyalists had that could deal with the chaos possessed of the World Bearers. Well, you see, the Nemesis chapter retained a high proportion of bolters as their primary weapons. In some cases, it would be 50-50 between bolters and all types of other destroyer-based weapons, but more often than not, the Nemesis would infuse their bolters with specific type of destroyer munitions, i.e. radiological, magical, alchem, phosphex, warp in some cases. And during that, when they fought the possessed, these bolt shells were incredibly effective. But not only that, the way that the Nemesis fought also countered the word bearers very well as well. The Nemesis fought in disciplined ranks, slowly unloading death upon the enemy, a sort of automata style of warfare. Very tactical, very calculated, very unfeeling. And when you compare that to the savage zealotry of the word bearers and their need for vengeance and blood and all that, they're two diametrically opposed forces, but in this case the Ultramarines have the advantage. But after the Battle of Kelf, the Nemesis chapter would be forever changed. They would go from being dour yet a little honorable to being true pariahs. Not by the Legion of themselves, the Legion quite lauded them ironically, but the sheer amount of trauma that they faced on Kelf would forever change the Legion. They would commit themselves and assign themselves to death. They would believe themselves already scarred and marked. Robute Gilliman would even comment on this, when before the Nemesis chapter were a legion of honorable yet dour men, now they were a chapter that were wholly consigned to the fate of death, the fate of destruction, the fate of a destroyer. We then move on to the most iconic of all of the destroyers, that being the 14th Legion Death Guard and their Mortis Poisonous squads. Mortis Poisonous squads were incredibly effective and incredibly specially trained cadre within the destroyer companies of the Death Guard. Each destroyer company had an elite, and these were the elite. These guys were armed with a potent alchemical spewer weapon, essentially a chemical flamethrower. Now, while most destroyers didn't really use standard weaponry, these guys purely used any and all type of alchemical weapons. But more often than that, these were potent mixes made specifically and exclusively by the Death Guard and not themselves. To say that these weapons were effective would be a hilarious understatement. These weapons would end up destroying anything and everything they came across, including their operators. While Space Marines are notoriously durable and incredibly resilient to any and all forms of alchemical warfare, the special cocktails cooked up by Morty and his boys were a different breed altogether, much like the Death Guard. So much so that Mortis Poisonous would often slowly die a withering death, being reduced to hollow shells of their former selves, their fertile gene might being reduced to nothing but jaundice-filled pale-skinned bones. And indeed, this got so bad that some people truly did believe that this was indeed actually a punishment in forms of the Legion, a way to censure Death Guard who had failed. But there were also the other half, who believed this as an honor above honors. For what more honor is there to die by the poison that you make, to die with your foes and to rend them in alchemical flame and fire? Yes, Morty was not a stable father, nor were his sons. Rip the Dusk Raiders. But from the most iconic to my most favorite, the Pyroclasts. You see, Big Papa Daddy Vulcan, he didn't like destroyers. Why? Because he doesn't like turning everything into alchemical sludge of death. But he understood that sometimes there were Xenos that needed to fucking die. So what did Papa Vulcan do? He created his destroyers, but he created them using fire. The Pyroclasts were unique amongst destroyers, in that they were indeed an elite cadre, but they focus on not only offense but defense. These guys were given a very special Ash Mantle Artificer armor plate. More specifically, this plate was also covered by Drake Scale, but not only any Drake Scale, but by Helldrake Scale. These Helldrakes, quote unquote, were a specific type of dragon on Nocturne that dwelt in the hottest parts of the cavern, in some cases them living in literal lava. This Ashen Plate would then be combined with the Drake Scale and the Artificer armor to create the Ashen Plate, and this would be given to the Pyroclasts. But this was more of an added layer of protection because of the weapon they used. These guys used a special type of Pyroclast projector. This was a unique artificer armament created by Vulcan enough himself. It had the ability to produce searing hot flames that could absolutely scour any forms of enemy infantry and still be effective against power armor, or it could supercharge the nozzle into a gout of melter-like plasma fire that could absolutely annihilate any and all forms of heavy armor, meaning that the Pyroclast could switch between a heavy-duty flamethrower that could threaten heavy armor, or the biggest giant fuck-off melter gun you have ever seen in your life. Big Daddy Vulcan, as always, showed why he's such a goddamn giga-chad. Papa Vulcan, he didn't fuck with any of that gay shit that was alchemical or radiological weapons. Nah, somebody said you can't use a flamethrower to kill a tank. Papa Vulcan said, hold my motherfucking beer. And motherfucker made a goddamn flamethrower that could kill a tank. And gave his boys the best badass looking armor ever. Look at those motherfuckers. They look tight as fuck. Also, the Drake Skin face mask. God, that's fucking sick. I love Vulcan. Salamanders are the best Legion. Fuck you. We then have the Death Sworn Pack, also known as the Black Cull. And this is from the Space Wolves. Ah yes, the puppies of Fenris. So, within the Space Wolves, sometimes their genes seem to get a little bit defective, but instead of turning them into literal werewolves, it would make them go a little bit crazy. More specifically, it would fill them with a mental instability which gave them an all-killing impulse. But this wasn't a fervorous frenzy killing, it was much more of a slow descent into madness, a very sinister, sadistic type of kill. And think more serial killer than Butcher and Berserker. And eventually, these souls would come to worship a subcult of the Forensian god of wolf death, known as Morkai. These cults of Morkai would gather together in so-called Deathsworn packs, known collectively by the Legion as simply the Black Cull. And these boys would be given any and all types of weapons they wanted, and they would go out and they would kill the foe. They also had wolf helm masks, because wolf. Finally, we have the Angels, more specifically the Blood Angels. The Blood Angels had two unique varieties of Destroyer cults, that being the Angels' Tears and the High Host. The Angels' Tears were just that. They wore silver death masks with a silver tear running down the cheek. They were the necessity evil. Sanguinius did not like destruction, nor did he like destroyers, and these boys were very somber about their duty. They understood that they were a need, a necessity, but they hated what they did, and thus they did it in a somber attitude, and they were very sad about it. But don't get it twisted. Whilst they may have been sad, that didn't mean they were ineffective. These boys carried with them a burning vengeance, a hatred, not only because they had to do what they do, but more specifically there was an enemy that threatened humanity that worthied such destruction. These would be silent destroyers, carrying the vengeance of the angel under the writ of mankind, and rendering havoc and destruction unto any foe who would deem to stand between humanity and its ultimate destiny of triumph. But on the complete opposite flip coin, we have the High Host. The High Host was the second formation of destroyers within the Ninth Legion. However, unlike the Angels' Tears, they weren't sad. They quite enjoyed this. They were the High Host, they were the destroyers, they were the wrath of the angel. They delivered righteous justice upon the foe, which had destroyed and smited mankind and dare to impede the path of the great angel. They knew what they were doing was bad. They knew that alchemical and phosphorus, all that nonsense was wrong, but at the same time, there was a motherfucker who needed to be killed, and these motherfuckers had the gun, so they're gonna shoot and they're gonna be happy about it. One of my favorites, because I love the dichotomy of it, you have the Angels' Tears, which are sad and somber, but understand their duty, and then you have the High Host who's like, fuck it, we ball! You came to the wrong hood, motherfucker, now I'm gonna pump you up with radiological lead. I love it. It's fucking great. It's sick. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we can see, destroyer squads throughout the legions, like anything in the legions, have their own unique type of variant flavor and twist. But we can see that ultimately, these are a necessary evil. Destroyer squads were a weapon of genocide, or xenocide. They were a weapon of, well, destruction. They were only used when an enemy, society, or culture was deemed unfit to exist alongside humanity. And memes aside, that rarely did happen. The only time it would ever happen was when there would be a specific type of Xenos entity that quite literally wanted to destroy humanity or was terrible for humanity to exist with. However, after the heresy, these would be seen as a symbol of a bygone era, an unnecessary tool of destruction and wrath that had helped not only further humanity from its ultimate goal, but actually helped kill millions if not hundreds of millions of people. Thus, in the new Codex Astartes, they were done away with, and the Heavy Support Squad was created in its wake. Now, whether or not these guys will ever make a comeback in Warhammer 40k, probably not, but you never know. With the Lion back, I'm sure that he's going to revitalize the Dreadwing in some capacity and bring back some of that old Dark Age technology, and if Papa Vulcan comes back, he's definitely going to give his boys their good old Artificer armor and that Pyroclast projector. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so very much for watching. I do love and appreciate y'all. Let me know what you think down below. Do you guys destroyers should come back in Warhammer 40k? And which is your favorite class of destroyer? You know the Pyroclasts are my favorite, cause fucking duh. But let me know down below. I want to hear what you guys have to think. Once again, thank y'all for watching. I do love and appreciate it. But a very big thank you to my members. Big shout out to my Lieutenant tier members, Mr. Eddie V3 and Miss Withdraw of the Void. Big shout out to my Sergeant tier members, Mr. Damiak, Mr. Andy McGee, Mr. Warsmith.Fireheart, Mr. RB20 Guy, and Mr. Corn's Butcher. And shout out to my private tier members, Mr. Thomas Muslons, Mr. Ivan_SBW, and Mr. Michael Hayeda. A sincere, honest, and heartfelt thank you to each and every one of you. The fact that you guys do this means that I can afford to make daily videos, and remember, I am trying to make this my full-time vocation, and the more people who sign up, it gives me that more assurance month after month, meaning that I have more of an option to actually try and make this my full-time vocation. So if you guys want to sign up to the memberships, you get early access to these videos, you get a whole bunch of awesome benefits, you get some behind-the-scene updates, you get sneak peeks on stuff, and if there are ever any major decisions on this channel, you'll have a hand in making them. And if you guys want to request a specific video, you can sign up to the Captain tier. Signing up to the Captain tier, you will get one video about any topic, any model, any series, whatever it may be, and I will make it for you the very goddamn next day. Yes, I will. Well, remember, this will always be free, and you watching will simply be more than enough. So, I want to thank y'all from the very bottom of my heart, and I would love you just the same. Mwah! Yes, I will. But ladies and gentlemen, I've been the General Bradley 101. You've been meeting up for awesome and amazing people. Thank y'all all so very much for watching. Make sure to stay true out there, boys and girls. And I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss, Rangers. Now you could talk about which destroyer is more effective, but you gotta admit, Pyroclast looked the fucking best.